The day I found out my parents had sold my inheritance. They were sitting across from me at Sunday dinner, smiling like nothing had happened. My mother was pouring tea. My father was talking about the weather. And I was laughing at something my younger cousin said when my phone buzzed under the table. It was a message from a lawyer I didn't recognize. Miss Carter, I need to speak with you regarding the property transfer finalized last month. I remember staring at those words while my chest slowly tightened. Property transfer. I excused myself and walked into the hallway, pretending I needed air. My hands were already shaking as I called the number. The lawyer sounded nervous. Ma'am, I assumed you already knew. Knew what? I whispered. There was a long silence before he answered. The estate your grandfather left behind was sold 6 weeks ago. I felt the floor disappear beneath me. My grandfather's estate wasn't just property. It was my childhood. The old lake house where he taught me how to paint. The little bookstore he owned in town. The land he always promised would stay in the family. Especially for me. You must be mistaken, I said quickly. My grandfather left that to me. Yes. The lawyer replied softly. Originally. That word shattered something inside me. When I walked back into the dining room, my parents looked up at me with those same calm expressions. My mother even smiled. You okay, honey? And in that moment, I realized they knew. They had known the entire time. I couldn't even hear the conversation anymore. The room felt distant, blurry. My father kept eating like nothing had happened, while my heart was breaking right in front of him. That night, I drove home in silence. I kept remembering my grandfather during his final days. He had held my hand so tightly in that hospital room. This family falls apart when money gets involved. He warned me quietly. Promise me you'll protect what matters. At the time, I thought he was talking about memories. I didn't realize he was warning me about them. For weeks after his funeral, my parents had comforted me. They hugged me while I cried. They told me everything would be okay, all while secretly signing away the one thing he left for me. But what I didn't know that day was that they had made one mistake, one document they forgot to hide. And that single paper was about to expose everything. The next morning, I went straight to the county records office. Part of me still hoped the lawyer was wrong. Maybe there had been confusion. Maybe my parents had temporary control over the property. But deep down, I already knew the truth. The woman behind the desk handed me a folder with the transfer documents. My hands trembled as I opened it. There it was. My grandfather's estate had been sold to a development company for millions. And beside the signatures were my parents' names. I stared at those signatures for so long that the ink started to blur through my tears. They didn't even tell me. Not before the sale. Not after the sale. Nothing. I drove to my mother's house that evening, with the papers sitting beside me, like evidence from a crime scene. When they opened the door, they instantly knew why I was there. You sold it, I said quietly. Neither of them answered. You sold Grandpa's house, the bookstore, everything. My father sighed heavily, almost annoyed. We did what was necessary. Necessary. That word burned through me. It wasn't yours to sell. My mother crossed her arms. We're your parents. Everything we've done has been for this family. I laughed through tears. For this family. Or for yourselves. That's when the truth finally started pouring out. My father's business had been failing for years. Secret debts. Loans they never told anyone about. They were drowning financially after trying to maintain an image of success, and my inheritance became their escape plan. You had no right, I whispered. We raised you. My father snapped suddenly. Do you know how much we sacrificed? I stood there frozen, because somehow they had turned their betrayal into my guilt. For days, I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying every family dinner, every hug, every fake smile after Grandpa died. I started questioning my entire childhood. Had love always come with conditions? But the worst part wasn't losing the money. It was realizing my parents never saw me as a daughter in that moment. I was just access to something valuable. Then, 3 days later, the lawyer called again. "There's something you should see," he told me carefully. We met in his office downtown. He handed me a thin, enveloped on inside was a handwritten amendment to my grandfather's will. It had never been filed officially because he passed away before the appointment was finalized. But the document was signed, witnessed, and very real. My grandfather had added one condition before his death. If the estate was ever sold without my written approval, all proceeds would legally transfer into a protected trust under my name. I looked up slowly. The lawyer nodded. They didn't know this existed. For the first time in weeks, I finally breathed again. The money from the sale had already been frozen, while the courts reviewed ownership disputes. My parents had spent part of it already, assuming the deal was done. But legally, they were no longer protected. And suddenly, the people who ignored my calls for weeks started calling me non-stop. My mother cried on voicemail. My father demanded we handle this privately. But something inside me had changed. The little girl, desperate for her parents' approval, was gone. And in her place was someone they no longer controlled. The court hearing lasted less than 2 hours. That was all it took for the truth to destroy the image my parents had spent years protecting. Their financial records were exposed. Their secret debts surfaced publicly. The judge reviewed my grandfather's amendment carefully, while my parents sat there, looking pale and exhausted. For once, they couldn't talk their way out of it. My mother cried quietly beside my father, while the lawyers explained everything. The estate sale had violated the final conditions of the inheritance agreement, which meant the remaining money belonged to me completely. I thought winning would feel satisfying, but honestly, it just felt sad, because sitting across that courtroom, I didn't see monsters. I saw two people so consumed by pride and greed that they destroyed their own family. After the ruling, my father approached me outside. "Please," he said softly, "we can fix this. Fix this." I stared at him for a long moment. "You already had the chance." He looked older somehow, smaller. And for a second, I almost felt guilty, until I remembered every lie, every fake smile, every moment they watched me grieve while hiding the truth. No amount of money was worth losing your daughter, I told him quietly. Then I walked away. I used part of the inheritance to reopen my grandfather's bookstore in a smaller building near the lake, not because I needed the money, but because I needed something honest in my life again. The first day we reopened, I hung one of my grandfather's old photographs behind the counter. Under it, I placed a small handwritten sign, "Protect what matters." People in town still ask me sometimes if I've forgiven my parents. The truth is complicated. I no longer carry anger the way I used to. Anger is heavy. It follows you everywhere. But forgiveness doesn't always mean returning to the people who broke you. Sometimes forgiveness simply means choosing peace for yourself. Still answer my mother's occasional texts. I still hope they someday understand what they truly lost. Because it was never really about the inheritance. It was about trust. And once trust is sold, it rarely comes back. In the end, my grandfather was right. Families don't always fall apart because of money. Sometimes they fall apart because money reveals who people truly are. And the hardest lesson I ever learned was that the people who raise you can still betray you, but their betrayal does not have to define your future.